The climate change agenda for 2010 was set in Copenhagen in December. But it's here, in cities like Accra, in nations like Ghana, that climate change and other environmental challenges will take their greatest toll if our economic system doesn't begin to account for the destruction of nature's services. The Niger Delta, for example, has lost much of its fisheries, farms, and forests over the last half-century as oil wealth trumped all other ecosystem values. These images were presented at the 15th Katoomba meeting, which took place over 4 days in 2 cities in Ghana this past October, to bring the value of nature's services into our economy by bringing local businessmen together with venture capitalists, community leaders, policymakers, and leading environmental scientists from across West Africa and around the world to develop workable means of recognizing and quantifying the economic value of Western Africa's living ecosystems so that these values can be incorporated into the region's economy. Tunde Morakinyo is advising the Nigerian state of Cross Rivers, which has embraced environmental finance to avoid going the way of the Delta. That's what brought him to this Katoomba meeting.
So in a way, coming to Katoomba is quite strategic for us, in that if we can get all the Nigerians here thinking about forests and red when they go back to Nigeria, we're hoping to make a difference in Nigeria.
In 2007, oil was also discovered off the coast of Ghana, which is one reason the newly elected government lent its support to the Katoomba meeting.
I must say that this meeting is opportune because issues of red and now red class, there's a superscript, and that must be noted, is very, very relevant to the times in which we are. We are also particularly concerned about the issue of payment for ecosystem services. And here we want to provoke you.
And that meant challenging assumptions about the role of government, the role of the private sector, and the role of civil society, all the while keeping in mind 3 basic themes laid out early by Forest Trend's founder and president, Michael Jenkins.
But to me, it boils down to 3 fundamental reasons why it's critical that we are here today. The first is scale, and all of us that have been working in conservation and sustainable development over the last decades always are trying to find scale, to achieve scale, to make sure that our results are meaningful. And I think we will see through the conversations and the presentations today that these new environmental markets, ecosystem service markets, are giving us an unusual opportunity to talk about scale. The second is scope. I mentioned already that while Copenhagen and climate change and red, everybody's thinking a lot about carbon, there are a suite of these new environmental markets that are all emerging, that are all very promising. So to keep in mind the idea of scope. Red is not going to work for everybody, carbon is not going to work for everybody, but when you look at the full array of these new emerging ecosystem service markets and payments, you will undoubtedly find one that works for you in whatever circumstance you're in. And the last thing that I wanted to think about was pace. I think everybody...
These 3 themes drove discussions over 2 days of public meetings and 1 day of focused private workshops, as academics, farmers, corporate executives, investors, and activists sought common ground in findings from pilot projects around the world, bringing the values of water, biodiversity, and carbon sequestration into West Africa's economic system. Panels focused on issues both global and specific to the region, such as the latest developments in red policy, the latest means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by improving land use, and how these various developments converge in the creation of cocoa-based carbon credits and other agroforestry-based mechanisms that could help subsistence coffee, cocoa, and tea producers improve their quality of life while preserving the environment, if it's done right.
Many people in this room are going to be very, very influential in this structure that's going to be created. The beauty of the moment that we're in is we are the builders. We're not going to watch we're going to actually get involved and do the building.
But this conference is unique in its way because it's one of those rare platforms where we have stakeholders from the various constituencies, like from the public sector and by way of government, from the private sector, from civil society, and from the academia. The researchers are bringing ideas together and addressing specific questions.
Those questions drove workshops that continued late into the night with the introduction of the West Africa Katoomba Incubator, launched by the Katoomba Group and the Nature Conservation Research Center to help small local projects deliver the kind of results that will attract global financing.
The Katoomba Group can bring to these kinds of projects global quality and caliber capacity in the ecosystems markets perspective, technical and business expertise. But we need to work together with local partners that have the real depth and experience in forest conservation and forest.
And therefore incubator projects are about making sure you change the world starting locally. Your farm, your forest, your stream, your river, your community.
Then it was off to the coastal village of Armina for invitation-only workshops designed to develop workable payment for ecosystem services schemes in a more intimate setting before breaking into brainstorming groups that late into the night explored the latest implications of new technologies relevant to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Vietnam, where the next 2 Katoomba meetings will take place. Like those meetings to come, this meeting in Ghana built on findings from previous events, such as Katoomba XIV, which took place in the Brazilian rainforest and was followed by working groups in Washington and Ghana, which generated detailed analyses of how these policies might impact the sustainability of Ghana's #1 cash crop, cocoa. Meanwhile, the Katoomba News Service Ecosystem Marketplace commissioned seasoned journalists in Africa, Europe, and the Americas to produce a series of in-depth feature stories accessible to a mainstream audience, and examining the economic value of all of the region's living ecosystems and how environmental finance can help ensure a sustainable future for small-scale farmers. A similar process played out in the lead-up to the most recent Katoomba meeting in Palo Alto, California, which focused on ways that payments for ecosystem services can help preserve the ocean's bounty. Findings from this meeting will be developed further in Vietnam, where the focus will be the science and finance of mangrove preservation. This, in turn, will lay the groundwork for the meeting after it in the Democratic Republic of Congo. On the final day of Katoomba 15, participants visited a cocoa plantation, where they had an opportunity to interview subsistence farmers and co-op managers, key stakeholders in any attempt to design cocoa carbon credits. When it was over, Ecosystem Marketplace uploaded dozens of presentations from the event to serve as an open resource for investors, academics, policymakers, and non-governmental organizations like the Nature Conservation Research Center of Ghana, whose executive director, John Mason, praised Katoomba 15 as, quote, a critical watershed moment for RED and PES issues in West Africa. The establishment of the incubator for West Africa is a massive contribution to the various RED pilots that have started in Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone, he says. With your assistance, we have been able to host special RED carbon events in Ghana that have involved personnel from all 4 countries.